same format, same creator, one video, 2 million views, one 2,000 views. What's the difference? And just doing that over and over again. And through that, you start to glean patterns and the structures.
Is there like a shortcut version, like Lazy Man's version of doing research?
There's these storytelling formats that give you the pattern to being successful. Now, our team's done over 10,000 hours of research, and we've done analysis on over 220 formats. The first place to start and kind of the shortcut is a lot of people fall into this trap of like batch producing content. And the challenge with batch producing content is like, let's just say Robert Croak, who uses a format called walking listicles, where he's literally just walking, talking into his phone. So it's not about how fancy your editing is, how fancy your equipment is. It really comes down to identifying that key format. So oftentimes high production value will work against you, because the minute they see high production value, it's kind of triggering them on a subconscious level as like, oh, this person's trying to sell me something. We recently did a project for the Diary of CEO, Stephen Bartlett podcast. And one of the biggest pieces of advice that I could give in terms of trying to master podcast cut downs for virality is a lot of people go into an interview with a question. And what I recommend and seen success with is going in with a hook.
Makes a good hook.
So I think that there's a few different elements as we look at hooks. I think a great place to start is like, what mistakes do people make as it pertains to hooks? And if we think about social media and the world that we live in, it's very different than we say like pre-social media over 20 years ago. And the reason it's so different is you have so many more people producing content. You know, today there's close to 5 billion people on social media publishing billions of pieces of content. So we need to ensure that we are standing out with our hook. So what does that actually mean? Because it's pretty general. Is, well, first off, understanding that what we are saying has already been said, whether we like it or not. Like, we have to admit, like, what we're talking about has been said probably thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of times. It doesn't matter the industry or the sector. And as we look at the world that we live in, with so much content, there's a short attention span for grabbing the attention. So we live in a micro attention world from grabbing attention, not necessarily holding attention, because we think about what the medium we're on right now is people will sit in and listen for 30 minutes, an hour. People will binge watch a Netflix series. So there's this misconception about micro attention. There is micro attention for grabbing it, but not necessarily holding it. So if we think about the micro attention for grabbing that, we have to really convey our hook in those first 3 seconds, or potentially less, why what we're saying is different than what they have heard before. So, for example, is like, let's just say you and I are creating a video about meditation. Meditation, there's probably millions and millions of videos out there. If we say like meditation is the key to being content, or meditation is the key to happiness, or something general like that, even though we may have a unique perspective on it, people subconsciously are going to be like, oh, I know what this person's going to say, even though we may have a unique perspective. So we need to kind of sometimes flip that script. So we could say something like, meditation is a scam. And we can say, you know, when I first started learning meditation, I thought it was a scam. I didn't think it would work because I couldn't sit still. But then I learned these 3 principles that really flipped and changed my mind to no longer believing that meditation is a scam. Now, you don't have to go to that level of extreme. I'm just kind of providing example of like how you need to kind of shift that perspective that, oh, this person is going to provide something unique and different than I've heard before. Another aspect of a hook, specifically as it pertains to social media, is we call it the generalist principle. Most people have learned in kind of branding and marketing principles and models that were created pre-social media. And that is, let's design a niche message for a niche audience. Well, when we're talking about social media and specifically organic social and going viral and reaching, you know, the highest levels of the potential of these platforms, why doesn't that work? Well, the fundamental reason that that doesn't work is the algorithms. And there's a lot of kind of demonization, frustration, common myths about the algorithms. But simply put, the algorithms have one fundamental goal, and that is just to keep people on these platforms longer. The longer people spend on these platforms, the more ads they can serve, the more profit they generate. And because they have billions and billions of pieces of content to choose from, They are looking for content that they could seed to millions of people and grab and hold that attention. So as you construct your hook, how does it, specifically talk to your niche audience, but also make it interesting to the wider possible audience? So to give you an example of that, we had a client that was really struggling with social media, didn't have a lot of experience. His name is Tanner Leatherstein, and he ran a leather goods business. So he sells like leather briefcases, wallets, purses, like the highest quality. Like he has multi-generational leather craftsman um, expertise through his family. And what he was doing is he was just creating like ads or commercials and putting them on organic social, and it just wasn't resonating. So in terms of the hook, we looked at, well, how can he share his deep expertise, his experience, and the quality of his knowledge and how it results to, the end outcome of the goods. So we helped him design a format called "Is It Worth It?" So that's kind of the hook, where he'll buy a $500 Chanel handbag and deconstruct it on screen and tell you whether it's worth the money you're paying for it. He'll literally rip apart this thing that he spent, and he doesn't get these free from brands. He actually buys them and deconstructs it and tells you whether it's worth the money you're looking for. So in that angle, even if you're not interested in buying his products or service, or his products, his leather goods, you are interested in kind of what happens. Like I don't buy, $500 Chanel handbags, but I'm interested to see, is it actually worth the money that they charge for it? So that's what we kind of call the generalist principle there.
So I talked about I heard you talk about the generalist principle before, and I heard you talk about like Erica, the attorney, how she like does like the
Yeah,
whole
Erica Kohlberg.
yeah, the terms and conditions thing. So do you get any pushbacks from people like clients or something like that where because like most attorneys be like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to make like that. That's like too that just seems like you know too simple or like that they wanna, like, show their expertise, like, even that leather guy you were talking about, he probably wants to he has a wealth of knowledge maybe that he wants to talk about. He's like, "Ah, no, that seems like too shallow," or something like that. Do you ever get that kind of pushback? And how do you balance that? How do you handle that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And yes, we get that pushback a lot. Because again, most people are operating off the paradigm of, well, I want to just speak to my core audience. And you can do that in paid social, as you know, like you can be more granular with your message because the targeting can be more granular. But even in paid, like paid is not a substitute for great storytelling, and it's like all it does is get you to skip kind of the line in the algorithm and guarantee that your content's put in front of people. It doesn't guarantee people are going to watch it. So your paid in a way has to stack up against organic content. So even these principles we're talking about do kind of apply to having higher performance in paid. But specifically, like how do we tackle that problem with clients? When we talk about it on the surface level, it does seem like we're watering things down, but it really, in reality, it's not. Like, again, with Tanner's, uh, um, format of "Is it worth it?" When he's deconstructing that handbag, he's sharing his expertise and knowledge of like, "Oh, this stitching is not good because X, Y, and Z," or "They glued this," or "They use this fake material," or "This is really good material and here's why." So in that format, on a surface level, it can kind of seem like, oh, he's just telling you whether a $500 Chanel handbag is worth it. But in reality, if you actually watch the content, he's getting super deep within it. Erica Kohlberg as well, she uses a format a lot called two characters, one light bulb, where she plays two different characters. One's the expert and one's the novice, and they're breaking down, common misconceptions. So Erica uses like what happens if your flight is delayed or flight canceled or AirPods break. And at the surface level, it may not look like there's a lot of depth there, but she is using her expertise and knowledge of really breaking down the fine print of it. So, yes, we get a lot of pushback because it does seem like on the surface level, oh, I'm just watering down who I am or what I'm about. But really, what we're doing is we're just shaping the contextualization of how you're expressing that information so that more people are interested in it. And once you get people kind of interested in the hook, as we just talked about, they're more willing. to go further and further. Like an analogy is there's a lot of people that aren't, interested in World War II movies, but you have a great director like a Steven Spielberg or Christopher Nolan that can contextualize a story that brings people in, and then they're learning about World War II. Or even Quentin Tarantino, did the movie about World War II.
Yeah.
You know,
Glorious
again,
Bastards. Yeah.
yeah, and you don't have to be interested in World War II to get people into that subject matter, but as you do, you are learning about that subject matter.
That's a really good analogy. Like I guess that's where the art, that's probably, it's easier said than done, right? That's probably
Yeah.
what you guys do, is to combine those two things. So how can we make it generalist, but at the same time, like really show
Yeah,
off the expertise?
it's not easy. I'm not gonna sit here and say it's easy, but it's simple. Is like you one of the kind of like things that you can think about in your head, or even sometimes clients will actually practice this, is if you have a concept for a video, go talk to your grandmother or your mother and be like, would you be interested in watching this? Or somebody that that's kind of a tough sell. And then if they're interested in, then you're kind of know you're on the right track of it.
Yeah. So one of the things that when after I read 1 Million Followers, like that, obviously, like I learned all of the things about the going viral and stuff like that. But the biggest takeaway I got is like, oh, there's no such thing as like shortcut. It's because it seems like a lot of what you guys do is like a lot of studying, researching, and collecting data and analyzing data, and that just takes time, right? Um, is there like a So I have a few different questions regarding this. So it does seem like these things take time to do. Number one, is there like a lazy man's version where, for people that are not, content creation is not their main full-time job, like let's say they're a coach or they're whatever, freelancer, whatever they are, and they're trying to make content for promotion. Is there like a shortcut version, like lazy man's version of doing research? What are some of the things that you typically look for when you study content, and is there like a express version of that?
Yeah. So it's a good question. I mean, first caveat, it's like any skill set in any business. It's like it takes time to master it. So whatever, industry you're in, I'm sure you didn't, get good at it overnight. It took time and practice to do it. And social media, people don't realize, is just another storytelling medium. It's like you have to be a good storyteller to really succeed at the highest level. So everything that you focus on should just be like, how do I become a better storyteller? It's not, no matter what people say, it's not about the amount of content that you produce, what time you post the content, what hashtags you use. It's purely the content and the storytelling that you use. So, what is the best shortcut? It's uh, what we focus on in Hook Point is identifying what we call a format. Some people call it a series, but we call it a format. So we've talked about one in terms of Erica Kohlberg of two characters, one light bulb, where she plays an expert and a novice, and she's not the only one that does this. Mark Tilbury is another one. There's a lot of other good content creators out there. Another example of a format is called Man on the Street, where you approach a random person on the street and you interact with them. We have a friend that we've done some work with named Alex Stemp, that's a professional photographer, and he approaches random strangers on the street and offers them a professional photo shoot. You see the story unfold and the reaction of the photo at the end of it. He's amassed over 19 million followers on TikTok using that single format. School of Hard Knocks is another account that uses that same format, where they approach successful people and ask how they've become successful. So there's these storytelling formats and structures that give you the clue, the pattern to being successful. Now, our team's done over 10,000 hours of research, and we've done analysis on over 220 formats. And I just say that because I want people to know that there's a lot of opportunities and formats out there. So the first place to start and kind of the shortcut is when you're using social media, because I would assume most people listening to this use social media just from a time passing thing or catching up with friends or things like that. As you're using it, turn from a passive use to an active use. So when you see a video that looks interesting to you that's generated millions of views, think to yourself, like, would I be interested in creating something like this? And if the answer is yes, then click on the person's profile and see if they've used that same format at least 5 to 10 times to have a lot of success. Because if they've just done it once, it's not really a benchmark for long term success. That doesn't mean you can't find other people that are using that same format. Now, obviously, if you see a viral video and you're like, oh, this went super viral, but I'm not excited about doing it, don't do it. There's a lot of options out there. Some people will say like, well, I just want to do this because I see other people having success with it, but I have no interest in it. I'm not passionate about it. I'm just going to do it because I've seen success. You'll burn yourself out doing that. You have to have some level of enjoyment. So once you have identified that format, I can tell you you're 99% ahead of everybody else in
Mhm.
terms of just taking that step. Because most people creating content for social media don't even understand what a format is or what the concept is. Now, the reason that we're looking for this format is we're looking for a structure that is proven to have success over and over again. Now, in our process, we're not just looking at the successful use cases of those formats. We now have to cross analyze, determining what's the difference between somebody using that format and generating millions of views versus somebody using that format generating just a few thousand views. And the reason of that is, you take Erica Kohlberg or Man on the Street or any of these formats, 99% of people that try to do the format will fail with it. Why? Because they don't understand the fundamentals of what drives success of it. It's like if we were to sit down and write a book or create a movie or sit down and play the piano for the first time, are we going to be good at it? No. And if we just sit down without trying to learn any of the principles that it takes to be successful with it, you're not going to be good at it. Like you have to learn these fundamentals. So if you want the short code to this is first understand the concept of a format and just dive a little bit deeper into trying to understand what makes that format tick. And I can tell you, and we've already touched about some of it. It's never really about the content; it's about the context of how we're shaping and delivering that message through that format that delivers the performance.
Yeah, I just want to also point out, like in your content, you actually show examples and you show like why this went viral, even though it's the same format, why this went viral and this one didn't. And I think like the level of granular like details that you guys go into is like unbelievable to me. Like, you know,
Yeah,
so I guess
and I'm sure you
yeah,
guys do it a lot in your work in your agency too. Is like designing or building a website, like there's a lot of granularity in like what color is the button, like where's the CTA, what's above the fold, what's below the fold, what is a desktop versus mobile experience. There's a lot of granularity in terms of reaching the highest level of success. So like everything that I'm talking about today is like how do you get to the top 1%, top 5% of social media creators? Sure, anybody can create an account, anybody can post content, anybody can get a few likes or 1,000 views on content. And if that's where you want to be and you're happy with that, that's cool. Then you don't need to go to that level of super granularity. But if you really want to break through and reach the highest levels and the highest potential, this is kind of how we look at these
that's true.
platforms.
Yeah, because like sometimes I'll a client will come to me and show me their website, and I'll break down like down to details like why it's not working. It's because this video, if you did it like if you present it like this, more people will watch it. Like they're like, oh, that makes sense. But the thing is, they don't see it until I point it out. And a lot of the videos that you make are like that too. Like once you explain it, like, oh, that's obvious. But as like because it's probably because you've watched like millions of videos and you see it right away. But people like us, we might not see it right away. You know.
Yeah, we have a team of researchers on staff. I mean, again, we've done about 10,000 hours of research and our model has been used at this point to generate about 60 billion views and 100 million followers and a billion in revenue. And it's because we just look at these details and it's very simplistic, but it's very in depth of like comparing something, the same format, same creator. One video generates, 2 million views, one generates 2,000 views. What's the difference? What's happening? And just doing that over and over and over again. And through that, you start to glean, the patterns and the structures.
So in terms of, let's say, investment in time, like let's say I'm a creator, I have like, or I'm a entrepreneur and I have about 10, 20 hours a week to spend on making content. Would you tell that person to spend that to make like, to really do the granular research and make one good video a week? Or would you tell them to like, post 5 times a week? Do you know what I mean? Like, do you think that, because before you also talked about kind of, quality versus like, it's not about how many videos you post. So how would
Yeah,
you recommend
definitely.
them?
We're a huge believer in quality versus quantity, and I would rather see people start slow, to really learn the aspects of what drives success versus just trying to create as much content as possible. Because I think the challenge is like, let's just say a lot of people fall into this trap of like batch producing content. And the challenge is with batch producing content is like, let's just say we sit down one day a month and we do 20 videos in one day. Okay, so we've produced these 20 videos, we've produced the first video and it just doesn't work. And we kind of most people won't realize, like I would say 90% of people won't know why it doesn't work. But let's just say you're in that 10% and you do realize why it worked. Well, you can't really shift and change those other 19 videos. You're going to post them. I mean, that's just human behavior. You don't want to waste the time and energy and resources that went into that. So there's just a lot of opportunity loss. I will say that, listen, frequency can work once you understand and master the principles of, content creation and a specific format that you're working on. And also, once you master a format, you can layer in different formats as well. But in the beginning, a lot of the research happens is front loaded. So you're really spending a lot of time. I would rather spend, a few weeks researching, finding a format, doing an in-depth analysis of that format. Again, what's the difference between the successful ones and the unsuccessful ones? So you have a clear blueprint so that every time you produce a piece of content, if it doesn't work, now you're not losing that opportunity because you can go back to the research. Like one of the examples that we will do with clients is once we have the format, once we have the research, if they produce a video and it doesn't perform, well, we put the reference high performer on one side of the screen and their video on the other side of the screen, and then we play them side by side. And again, we're not looking at the content, we're looking at these contextual elements. And oftentimes you'll see, glaring things. It could be the captions, the title cards, their facial expressions, their distance from the camera, their lighting, their sound, the generalist principle, how good is their hook, those elements. But because you've done the research up front, you now have a blueprint to always go back to. In addition, if you do have success, if you knock it out of the park and you get a video with millions of views, you now know why. Because most people, especially in the TikTok era, TikTok made it a little bit more friendly for algorithms to push content to non-followers, and a lot of the platforms followed suit. You'll see a lot of creators or brands that will get like 1 out of 30 to go viral or 1 out of 50, or they just get one to go viral and they keep chasing to figure out how do I get the next one? How do I get the next one? But because they don't have that fundamental understanding of what are the elements in this format that drive that success, they ultimately fail to reproduce those results.
I know you talk about that, like anyone in any niche can go viral. Is there a certain like personality trait or something like that that you see common for people that go viral versus who don't? Like even when you work with clients, like what are like who are the type of people who actually like succeed working with you versus like maybe not as much?
It's a great question. It comes purely down to mindset. Like it's not really like a specific type of personality that like you don't need to be over the top or like loud or crazy or silly. You just have to have the right mindset because again, it's like there are so many different formats and structures of how you can kind of succeed. I mean, even looking at Erica, like she's not like in some cases she kind of comes off a little awkward a little sometimes, but it works because she's nailed the format and it's smart. Like She's not the most, she doesn't have the biggest personality. She's not like a Gary Vee that's kind of like over the top. So 100% of the time, I can just tell based upon the mindset of the person on whether they're going to succeed and take the actual time to implement what we put together. Another thing is sometimes when we work with bigger brands or companies is they have social media managers or social media experts on their team, and they're kind of experts or social media managers just because they've been on the platforms longer, but they haven't mastered the nuances of it. So they're very rigid in their thinking and they just don't want to change. I'm sure you've probably run into that with companies and building websites, and they have somebody on staff that wants to kind of tell you how to do their tell you how to do the job. And again, it's just like I go back to it time and time again. If you have the right mindset going in, you're willing to kind of put in the work and follow the blueprint, you're going to have success. You know, it's interesting. Like some of our biggest case studies are people with no social media experience. So it's not about experience. It's really mastering that format, following the blueprint, and actually doing the work.
That's so similar to like just entrepreneurship in general, right?
Yeah, it's similar to any skill set, really.
Yeah, the people that have kind of have the discipline to keep trying, and then also the open mind to like say, "Oh, I was wrong there." Like those are that seems like that works in entrepreneurship.
Yeah, it's interesting. Because any skill set in life, any skill set in business requires the same mindset. But the blessing and the blessing and the curse of social media is anybody can pull out a phone, click record, and post. And the curse and the downside is anybody can pick up a phone and post and record. It doesn't take a lot of thought that goes into it. And that's where I think people think it's a lot simpler just because I took the time to press record and post that millions of people should see my content. That and that's
Yeah.
kind of the downside of it. The upside is it's put the power, it's democratized mass communication into the individual's hands. It's like it's not about how much money you have. It's not about how big your team is. It's not about how fancy your equipment is. It's just purely your ability to storytell. Like we have clients that literally create their own content on their iPhone, very minimal lighting, and consistently go viral. Now there's other formats that require more, but sometimes that I think keeps people or holds people back from actually kind of getting started. They think they need this big operation or big team in order to be successful.
So kind of on that point, like the kind of videos that I usually like just clip videos from my podcast or clip like from my Zoom calls, and I use those. And you see a lot of those now, right? Like with the talking head videos where all they're doing is just talking to the camera or something like that. Um, for those people, like I think a lot of them are like, oh yeah, but I don't have cool like visual effects or cool something. Like I'm not like giving away $1 million or like they might be like, how can I make, because they might say, oh, the content that I make is boring. It's a boring topic, or, it's just me talking to the camera. Like, what would you say to them? Like, can you do these tactics also work for people like that, or should
A
they
hundred
change
percent.
format?
A 100%. So, there's another guy, Robert Croak, who uses a format called walking listicles, where he's literally just walking, talking into his phone, and he's breaking down. It's kind of like, if you want to be the first millionaire in your family, here's 3 tips. So he just breaks it down into kind of actionable tips, and he's literally talking on his phone as he's walking around the corner. There's another guy, and I can't remember his name, but our team and I were looking at him, but he literally shoots content in his car. So he's just sitting in the passenger seat with it parked. All of his content is just shooting in his car. And he's talking about, certain kind of life situations of like I think he's an attorney, but he's giving kind of actionable advice is like if somebody is, speaking down to you or something, this is what you do, things like that. And he consistently gets millions and millions of views. So it's not about how fancy your editing is. It's not about how fancy your equipment is. It really comes down to identifying that key format, and you can find the format that matches you. That, like, as I said in the beginning, is like you can keep searching and searching and searching until you find that one that's like, oh, this matches the style that I want to communicate in, um, matches the resources that I have. The one advice that I would give people is don't look for an apples to apples comparison with the format. So, like, if you're a tax attorney or a real estate agent or a financial advisor, when you're looking at formats, don't pay attention to the content because you may not find it, in the same subject matter doing the same type of content and succeeding. And that's a good thing. But looking at formats, you look at Erica Kohlberg and what she does in her format is like you can use that as a financial advisor. You could use that as a real estate agent. So looking at the formats more from almost like a container of like how you could put your message in instead of looking for a direct comparison of
Mhm.
the actual content and message.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like I do these like videos where I take little 30-second, 60-second clips from movies, and then I kind of put in writing like in the like what is like a storytelling lesson you can learn from this, or like I try to use that clip to teach storytelling, and I found those like usually do really well. And
Yeah, it's
I've
kind
seen
of
other
a
people,
reaction format. A reaction
yeah, yeah,
format.
yeah. But I
Yeah,
didn't do
those
it exactly like how other people did it. I did it like I just put in one sentence like what you can learn from this,
yeah.
and I keep
And
doing them
that's
now.
yeah, I mean, that's just another great example of a format that's uh low production value, low resources, but high potential is just reacting to other content. Now there is obviously it's again 99% of people are going to fail doing that format until they understand the things that we're talking about today. But like example, like there's a guy on YouTube's pretty massive, Dr. Mike, and he started off and went super viral of like real doctor reacts to Grey's Anatomy, real doctor reacts to The Good Doctor. And like again, on the surface level, it feels like, oh, this is like silly, it's watering down my message, but he's actually tangibly breaking down like medical aspects of like what he's seeing through the clips that he's consuming.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, I did this one clip, and it was about Johnny Walker. Like, it was a movie scene where they were talking about Johnny Walker, and the lesson that I was trying to teach was completely different. It was about how, like, so to give you context, the video he was talking about like Johnny Walker Red, Blue, and Black, and they're all different prices. And just because you do the cheap one doesn't mean you can't do the expensive one. And I compare that to like your content. Just because you do the simple surface level content doesn't mean you can't do the complex. Like you can do both, right? And when I read the comments, like about 20% of them understood the lesson. And this video got 7 million views. But the other 80% were just like, oh, like they were just talking about alcohol. They just like, they didn't even care about the lesson. So, but the
But
fact
see,
that 20% of 7 million people got it.
yeah, and I'm going to
was-
run the numbers on that because
Yeah.
it's a really good point because most people get this wrong. But 20% of 7 million is 1.4 million. So most people get this wrong is like they think about virality and be like, okay, well, I got 7 million people to watch this, but 80% of the people didn't get it, or 80% of the people aren't going to be my core target audience that's going to buy my products or services. So it's like, well, what would you rather have of 20% of 7 million or 80% of 10,000? Like it's just not even close. Like 1.4 million people getting it. Like that's a huge number. And that's where a lot of kind of business owners or think people get kind of virality because virality is a very general term. It's very kind of wide, but it's, in the generalist principle, people misunderstand. It's about raising the benchmark so high that the percentage will drop in terms of your core target audience, but that smaller percentage is outweighing by far, getting a higher percentage of a lower view
Mm,
count. In addition, like, if you're only getting, like, 10,000 or 5,000 views on a video, some people are getting less than 1,000 views. What that's telling you is people are not sticking around and watching it, even if they are your core audience. So that's just, again, telling you that your content, the retention of it is just not good enough. So even if it's 80 to 90% of your core target watching it, they're likely not watching a significant percentage of it.
that's a really good point. Um, I, I have a question that I want to go back to, but because you were saying this, what would you say about, like, for me, I've always thought like, oh, once I have one viral video, like that's gonna change my life, but that never happened. And and like every time like that a video goes viral or something, like it's like it makes a little difference. But so would you say, just would you agree with that? Like going viral once is not the goal. It's like you have to keep doing it like over and over and over. It's
100%. I mean, going viral once can change somebody's life, but it's not. It depends on the context in the video and things of that nature. But I agree with what you're saying 100%. It's the goal is not to do it once. The goal is to master the skill set that you can do it at will, essentially. That you understand the social dynamics of communicating to the masses through these platforms. Because if you have that power, I mean, you'll be unstoppable. I mean, you can build um, as much or as big of a business, as much revenue as you can kind of dream up. Um, so I agree with you. It's everything that we do is it's just not how we get somebody to go viral once. It's like how do we repeat that process over and over and over
Mhm.
again?
So kind of going back to the talking head video, like the boring topic videos. So a lot of people have podcasts and they use like little clips from their podcast as shorts, right? To
Yeah.
either promote the podcast or something like that. Is Do you have any like advice, or is that something that's even possible to go viral with those? Is there something a way you can edit that or something like that? Um,
So
uh,
it is
uh,
possible. It's very difficult. Um, so there's a few things. So I spent about 2 years in journalism working with journalist Katie Couric at Yahoo. Like we did 220 interviews together. I tested like 70,000 variations of content through that. And we recently did a project for the Diary of CEO, Stephen Bartlett
mhm,
podcast. And one of the biggest pieces of advice that I could give in terms of, trying to master podcast cut downs for virality is really go bef- a lot of people go into an interview with a question, and what I recommend and seen success with is going in with a hook. So before the
mhm,
interview is list what are the hooks that I think are have the potential to go viral for that person. And you know, you could actually look at clips that they have done before that have gone viral to get a sense of it. You could even just go to like Google Trends or Google News if there's a subject matter that they speak on that's going viral. But the big thing is instead of writing down questions, write down the hooks because something happens like podcasts kind of feel stale when it's question, answer, question, answer. Like it's one of the big reasons that Joe Rogan is so successful is it feels like a conversation. It feels like you're in the room. It's not an interview. It's an experience. Why it's called the Joe Rogan experience. So the more that you can go in with understanding the output of what you're looking for, it becomes less about me asking a question and more about how do I get the response from that individual that matches the hook that I'm going for. Because
mhm,
it's very easy for an answer to a question to fall flat, because sometimes, I'm sure you've interviewed very smart and successful people, but they're not very dynamic in their communication. So they'll be like, they ask a question and they'll be like, yes. So it's like, okay, if you elaborate, it doesn't kind of go. But if you know where you're kind of trying to drive it, it kind of gives you a lot of upside. Like one of the things that Stephen Bartlett does that's so so smart is they do so much research on their guests. Like they'll go dive super deep and find like what song is like emotional to them. And then they'll play that emotional song as they're walking into the studio. They'll look for these dynamics. And that's why there's so many people that are crying in Stephen Bartlett's interviews
mhm,
is they kind of know where to kind of go with it. So they know what the outcome is that they're looking for so that they're kind of shaping and shifting it as, even in the pre-interview process and even through that process. So the more you're trying to design the podcast for the end result of the clips, the more likely you are to have that success. And again, the same principle applies as what we were talking about before is once you start getting a lot of these clips and you get, you know, a few of them that go viral, start comparing them to the underperformers. Because most people just want to look at the wins. They don't want to look at the losses. And that comparison of like, what was the difference between, this podcast clip that got 1 million views and this one that got 5,000 views, and really sitting down and analyzing and learning those things will really help you excel to that next level.
Yeah, that that diary of the CEO, like I feel like they're, even though it's the same person, like I've seen their interview other elsewhere, when I see it on his podcast, it's like there, you're right, there's like a different emotion or some like something else comes out of the guest, and it's like it's so mesmerizing.
Yeah, and
But I didn't know.
one of the other things that they do is before it's launched on YouTube, they'll go and test like 100 thumbnail and headlines on meta ads to see which one has the highest click through. And the one that has the highest click through will then be leveraged for the thumbnail and headline. Because again, it's just you're testing what is the hook, what's gonna
Yeah.
because with YouTube, it's critically important for that thumbnail and
uh,
headline. Um, it's not the only thing, but it is critically important. So the more that you can kind of engineer what you're looking for of what you think is actually going to resonate and go into it with that, the more success that you're going to have.
yeah. Wow, that's so surprising that like nothing's by accident. It's like the amount of stuff that goes on behind the scenes. It's like I can kind of see, like it's like the same thing when you say, people watch social media or whatever, and they're like, okay, I can do that, but like they're not doing at the level that Stephen Bartlett's doing. Like,
Yeah. And again, it's so helpful to do an analysis of somebody like Stephen Bartlett or somebody else that has a big podcast with clips, and just doing an analysis of their high performers versus the low performers, analyzing your low performers against their high performers. You're just going to learn so much about that process
yeah.
of what makes a successful clip.
So I love what you said about like how he'll like research and play music before the interview, and like so that even it's just like a boring talking head video, like he can get those things out. One of the things that I in your video I see, like you talk about like you know like creating
Mhm.
mystery or like creating high stakes and things like that. How do you Can you give an example of like in a talking head video where I'm just explaining something? How can I make that high stakes? Like because I'm not like walking on a rope or tightrope or anything like that. So
Yeah,
for
so I
some
think it
boring topic, yeah.
well, I think it's creating if we're talking about a short form clip, it's setting up an expectation up front. And an example of like high stakes is the interview could ask a question that is controversial, or you just don't know what the response of the other person is going to be. It doesn't necessarily have to be controversial. I hate so a lot of people say, "Oh, like negative stuff drives social media performance." It's just like sure, there's negative stuff that goes viral, but there's plenty of negative stuff that doesn't. There's plenty of positive stuff that goes viral. But the more like if you're, just an example of high stakes or creating that tension is like you ask a question, you're like, "Oh, how is this person going to respond?"
Mhm.
It's one of the reasons that man on the street format really works is there's an unexpected nature to it. Is like even a lot of the people that are successful with man on the street will, you know, set up these experiences ahead of time and like either cast them or kind of schedule it ahead of time. But the more that you can kind of be like, what's going to happen allows that. And I think that a lot of Stephen Bartlett's trailers for um his podcasts are creating that high stakes of like what that can happen. You see, he's like Simon Cowell is crying about something specific, but they don't tell you why. What's raising the stakes of like, well, what is he actually crying about? What's going to do that? And that can happen in a kind of microcosm of a short form clip. Is like you start off with a hook, and it's like, well, how is this person going to respond? How is
Yeah.
this person going to answer to that? It's kind of like asking, um, a very vanilla type question versus, something that's more complex, more in depth. So that kind of raises the stakes.
Yeah. No, I see what you mean now. Like I can definitely see, because I sometimes I'll tell stories about projects that I worked on with certain
Mm.
clients that nobody knows, right? And like they know the outcome, but they don't know what happened behind the scenes or something like that. And usually, like, those are high stakes because they had no idea that this was going on behind the scenes or something like that.
Yeah.
And those seem to get a lot of attention.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like you take something out of that experience that may have been in the middle of it that nobody knows about that was super high stakes for you, but on the surface level nobody would know about, and you
Yeah,
kind of pull that out of it.
exactly. Um, okay, so I want to ask a little bit more, I guess not technical, but more techniques type, more, I guess, trend type of things. So, what do you think has changed from when you wrote 1 million followers, which I think you did on Facebook back then, right?
Yeah, so
So,
there's a few different versions of 1 million followers. I think we've done like 3 or 4 versions of it. So initially started on Facebook, then did Instagram, and then we just kind of built our creative model more robust, um, because there was just more and more people coming on the platform, to make sure that there was a sustainable model that people could follow to have success.
so if you kind of compare from when the book came out till now, what do you think has changed and what do you think is like remains the same?
So the thing that's changed is just there's a lot more people on the platforms. There's a lot more content that's being produced. The level of competition for attention, is extremely high. The first version of 1 million followers came out in 2017, so we're talking about, 7 years, since that came out. The thing that hasn't changed is it's pure storytelling. Um, it's just like how good of a storyteller you are. Now, there is this kind of big thing about frequency is the key to kind of breakthrough success. And the reason people say that is, and I don't know if it was still around in 2017, is more like probably like 2015. There may it still have been lingering, but these platforms had less content, less people producing content on the platforms. So they wanted to reward content creators for producing, content, and filling up their system. Because one of the things that people don't realize, and it still holds true today, all these platforms, they rely on us. We're the fuel that runs them. It's not like Netflix where they invest billions of dollars in original content. YouTube and, Instagram and TikTok, they're not investing billions of dollars in original content. They want us to produce it and succeed. So there was a time when they were rewarding content creators, for that. And another kind of element in TikTok kind of opened this up, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, but TikTok kind of started pushing, um, or changing the algorithms to push your content to people that don't follow you instead of just pushing the content to people that do follow you in a bigger and more frequent way. So that was another change. Again, it's not, we just look at it like there's no free wins in social media. It just really comes down to your ability to communicate. But the latest book, the guide to going viral, is the creative model that we've been building for the past like 5 years, and really just codifying like how do you become a masterful storyteller across any platform that you operate on.
Yeah, like what you said about the algorithm before. Every time I'm like, oh, algorithm hates me or I'm shadow banned, like, and then like a week later, like one of my videos will get 1 million views, and it just like always breaks that expectation. It's like it's never
Yeah,
the
I mean
algorithm.
the real the reason or the thing to ask yourself when those thoughts go through your head is why would they shadow ban you? Why would they suppress your reach if they need us to keep people on the platform longer? Some people will say, "Oh, they're doing it, they're suppressing it so that you pay to boost your posts." If that were the case, then like there would be no Mr. Beast, there would be no, these influencers, there'd be no Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan doesn't pay for reach. Like it's just not the case. And if you really understood how these platforms make money from advertisers, it's not from people spending $10 to boost a post. It's from people spending tens of millions of dollars a month, um, in a single brand to kind of really push it. I mean, the elections alone, I mean, there was hundreds and millions of dollars spent to these platforms on both sides.
For me, like I found that it's much harder to get views on Instagram than it is on like let's say TikTok or YouTube Shorts. Like outside of because like on TikTok and YouTube Shorts, I have way less followers. but when the video does well, it gets way more views than it does on Instagram. Is that like what do you think is the difference between in your opinion between Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube Shorts?
So the biggest difference is really in the user interface and the consumption behavior of these platforms. And it may like at a surface level, TikTok and Instagram Reels may look the exact same, but they're very different because the behavior of people that are on TikTok are different than Instagram. And it may be very subtle. And it's the same with YouTube Shorts. So the biggest thing is, and we see this a lot, is like there'll be a format that will go super viral on Instagram that just will flop on TikTok, or something that goes really strong on TikTok that doesn't go on YouTube. So most of the time, it's really how the content's designed that caps that reach. But there are people and certain formats that do extremely well on Instagram. There's obviously ones that do extremely well on TikTok and YouTube. So I would just be kind of again looking at what are the references on each of those platforms and understanding what are kind of the distinct differences there.
Mm. So you wouldn't recommend posting the same video on, let's say, Instagram, also on
So
TikTok, or
what I recommend is focus on engineering success on one platform. You can still post the content on other platforms, but don't just expect exceptional results by doing that. And don't get, demoralized if it doesn't perform. But there's no harm in kind of doing that, but focus your energy and effort on one, master that, and then you can kind of look at the other platforms and be like, well, how do I tweak this content to perform? Or do I need to look at a different format for these other platforms?
that's a good that's a good point. Yeah, the ones that I told you, the movie clip ones, like they perform exceptionally well on YouTube, but not so much on TikTok. And yeah, you're right. I do see a difference in it's like a completely different audience.
Yeah.
So
And it makes sense for YouTube. Like, for example, is like there's a lot of like movie trailer content on YouTube. There's longer form consumption content on YouTube. People are kind of like in a different mindset that even though it's a short form piece of content, it can correlate to that. Versus like Instagram and TikTok, there's not a tremendous amount of like movie related content. The movie trailers don't do as well
yeah.
because of just the design of the user interface.
Yeah, I noticed that on TikTok actually the less produced it is, the less like the more amateurish it looks, the better it does. Like at least for me.
So
I don't know.
that's an interesting point because uh, people consuming content across these platforms are professionals at consuming content on a subconscious level. So oftentimes high production value will work against you because the minute they see high production value, uh, it's it's kind of triggering them on a subconscious level as like, oh, this person's trying to sell me something, or this is like a commercial, or this is like an ad. But that's not to say that every like there's a guy on TikTok that's really good, Dylan Page, that
Mm.
does news, and his setup looks pretty professional. It's really well shot and stuff, but he's just mastered the social dynamics of that format he's doing. So for most people, I would say that that is the case is they're trying to kind of compensate for something and thinking production value is actually going to drive the performance when it's not, and typically it can work against you.
Okay, so this is a final question that I ask everyone. What do you think is like the biggest common myth that you see or you hear out there? And what's the truth?
Um, so we've covered a few, and just to recap a few, and then I'll try and think of one that we haven't covered. But one is like frequency is the key to success. I mean, frequency can come into play once you've mastered it. But the reality is the algorithms only care about content that can grab and hold attention for as long as possible. That's what they're going to favor. Um, we just talked about production value, that production value or fancy teams, big teams, money, spending money is that is the case of success. It's not like we have a lot of clients that are shooting content on their iPhones. It's just a pure storytelling aspect. I think one we didn't cover that's kind of like an interesting one that we see is there's like a mental roadblock with a lot of people that just can't see themselves succeeding at this level. Like communicating to millions of people is kind of a daunting and sometimes an unrealistic thing in their mind. But the reality is it can, like, if you go back and you watch like Mr. Beast's first video, like the level of communication there is pretty horrible. Like the amount of growth that he's had there, even looking at like Gary Vaynerchuk's first video. But I think that just having a positive mindset that it is possible, it is achievable, that, you know, the social media has given you an opportunity that it's not about what country you live in. It's not about your status in the world. It's not that you have to be a celebrity. It's not how much money you have. It's purely your ability to use this tool as a storytelling element that will connect with millions of people if you structure your message with some of the things that we've talked about today.
Is that roadblock like you think that people are not even starting, or they're like they just give up because they're
They,
like, oh, they
yeah,
don't.
they either don't start or they just give up super quick because, again, they have the mindset that, oh, because I can post something within 10 seconds of just clicking a button, that automatically that should equate to success.
Got it. Thank you so much. Before we go, how do people work with you? If they want to work with you or they want to learn from you, like what are some of the different ways they can?
Yeah, so they can go to hookpoint.com to learn more. And basically, our team create strategy. So we do the research, we find the formats, we create the blueprint for you. We also train people in our creative model. So if they want to learn more about that, they can go to hookpoint.com. Also, for all of your listeners, I'm actually giving away my new book, The Guide to Going Viral, for free. They can download the PDF or Kindle version by going to hookpoint.com uh, forward slash AAF. So if they just go to that, they can just download the book. We're not charging anything like that. They can just learn about the entire model in depth.
Yeah, I'm actually like halfway through that now, and it's like it's so amazing the amount of stuff you're giving away for free. Um, so
Yeah,
thank you for that. I'll put all the links, Hook Point, your books, everything in the show notes. Thank you again for your time, Brendan.
yeah. Thank
Um,
you. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure to connect with you and everybody that tuned into this.
Thank you, everyone, and I'll see you all next week. Cheers.